Like Maryland Route 4, Maryland Route 5 begins in Washington, D.C. and ends in southern Maryland. Both routes run in a southeastern direction. Both routes share a concurrency with another highway. Both routes are limited access highways in the north and end in two-lane highways. And both routes pass through county seats of Maryland counties. Route 5 begins at the Maryland line with Washington, D.C. as Branch Avenue. It intersects Pennsylvania Avenue within Washington, D.C., which becomes Maryland Route 4. And on the other end, Maryland Route 4 intersects Route 5 at its terminus in Leonardtown. The biggest differences between Routes 4 and Routes 5 are that in the beginning, Route 5 is heavily congested as it connects Washington, D.C. and Waldorf, which has no comparable city on Route 4. In the middle, Route 5 splits off the four-lane divided highway onto a small two-lane road, whereas continuing straight on the highway leads to Maryland 235, which is unusual for a major Maryland highway. Lastly, at the end, Route 5 terminates not at an intersection with another road or state line, but a dead end at the end of land in Point Lookout, the southernmost location in southern Maryland and on the western shore. Route 5 is the third longest state highway in Maryland. In this video, we will travel the entire length of Maryland Route 5 on a midsummer's day from Washington, D.C. to Point Lookout, a distance of 74 miles. We're now southbound on Branch Avenue in southeast D.C. This will eventually become Maryland Route 5. The light coming up is Southern Avenue, representing the southeastern border of Washington, D.C., and we've entered Maryland Route 5. Just like Route 4, the transition is completely silent. There's no highway sign to greet you after crossing the border. And the transition is not as abrupt, but it does begin to happen as we pass into Maryland. The first major crossing is the Suitland Parkway, which we're crossing under right now. Followed by that is the Washington Metro Rail Green Line. Now, if you're attentive, you'll have noticed that on the cross streets, there are actually signs for Maryland Route 5. But interestingly enough, there are no signs yet for the main road. You'll notice that the fan is absolutely blowing, as I discovered in the Maryland Route 4 video. If I don't have the fan continuously blowing, the camera will overheat and shut down. south side. interchange with the Capital Beltway, which is I-95 and I-495. If you turn west in about 5 miles, you'll pass National Harbor, across the Potomac, and enter Virginia. If you turn left and take the outer loop, you will end up at Maryland Route 4 interchange and keep spiraling around to eventually meet Virginia. At Interstate 495 and 95, Maryland Route 5 upgrades to become limited access. And it is through this stretch that I've seen some of the most aggressive driving in my driving career. The only worst highway that I know of that I've experienced is the Indian Head Highway, Maryland 210. It is also at the Beltway interchange that the traffic volume on Route 5 increases by an order of magnitude. as we saw a couple times on Route 2, to the right is an old-style Maryland highway sign. This freeway design, composed of repetitive upward bridge ramps or interchanges, is rather unique in Maryland. I can't think of any other freeway that exactly does this. And I tend to see freeways in Texas and Florida having this design, but it's not very common in Maryland, from what I can tell. After Woodyard Road in Clinton, we lose the left lane and go down to 2 lanes each direction. South of Clinton, Route 5 goes through a number of super intersections while largely maintaining a limited access highway quality. It still has a few grade level traffic light intersections from here south to Waldorf. I believe the long-term plan is, along with Route 4, to eventually eliminate these because, as you can see, they create quite a lot of backups, especially in rush hour, just like Route 3. first intersection is Surratt's Road, and the MedStar Southern Maryland Hospital is to the left. But if you ask me, this is not really Southern Maryland yet. Across Piscataway Creek, which is a major creek flowing into the Potomac around this location. We exit the contiguous suburbs of Washington, D.C. and enter an exurban region between the suburbs and Waldorf. But we are by no means finished with large towns. To this section of Route 5 is converting a few of the grade level intersections to overhead interchanges, such as what has been done with Brandywine Road.
is a new exit for Brandywine Road, Maryland 381, which serves a long east-west corridor along the southernmost tier of Prince George's County. And now we are approaching a grand merge concurrency with US Route 301. US 301 begins in Wilmington, Delaware, and follows a southwesterly course on the eastern shore until it reaches US Route 50 in Queenstown, just east of the Bay Bridge corridor. It then runs on the longest concurrency in Maryland with US Route 50 over the Bay Bridge through Annapolis to Bowie, and then at Bowie it turns south off of US Route 50, continues till right here, which is the bridge that we just passed underneath, and US 301 will then merge in from the right side. And I don't like how they've done this, because US 301 is mainly used as a bypass to the Baltimore-Washington area. So it carries a lot of long-distance traffic. And so they take the 4-lane 301 and put it down to, well, 2 lanes each direction, and put it down to 1 lane each direction, merging in. And I do not like that, because that part of 301 frequently backs up, and it creates a column of traffic which generally causes Route 5 in this area to back up. And honestly, I think it's a miracle that there's not a traffic jam here, because this is backed up almost all the time. The concurrency with US 301 used to be much longer, all the way to downtown Waldorf, if you'll call it a downtown, more of a center. But Waldorf has since grown to the Charles County line with Prince George's, and so a bypass was necessary. So Maryland Route 5 is now routed down Mattawoman and Beantown Road. But of course, what happens? The area keeps growing, and now the town of Brandywine is serving as an annex to Waldorf, and now there are commercial centers, shopping centers, as well as massive subdivisions that flank US 301 and Maryland 5. As a result, it's commonplace to find traffic congestion here, whether it's rush hour or not. And my only guess as to why there's not congestion now is because it's a beautiful summer day and everyone's at the beaches. Another thing that makes this area a particular challenge to drive through is the impatience of the drivers. There are lots of early red light running where the light just turns red but they go through anyway. A lot of acceleration on the shoulder. If you're not on your gas pedal enough, they'll go around you on the shoulder just so that they can accelerate faster, even if you haven't topped out. A lot of lane cutting. I've even seen lane splitting before. Charles County. Magically, we managed to reach the Maryland Route 5 split off of the 301 concurrency. We're about to cross Mattawoman Creek, which is a creek so large that by the time it flows into the Potomac River, it's about the size of a small river. Here, the opposite happens. US 301 continues straight, and to continue on Maryland Route 5, you have to exit the highway to the left at a stoplight. And you can see from the length of these turn lanes and the fact that there are 3 of them that this intersection carries a lot of traffic going to the left. But it should be noted that this is the beginning of where the traffic volumes begin to decrease substantially on Route 5. Now coming up, we're about to cross the CSX Pope's Creek Secondary, which used to feed the Morgantown power plant. Here it is right here. But because the Morgantown power plant was effectively shut down a few years ago, it no longer needs delivery, but instead the Pope's Creek helps to fuel the housing boom in this area by delivering tons and tons, literal tons, of aggregate gravel, which is used in the mixing of cement for the pouring of foundations. And now you can see all the new construction. And just like that, the bypass of Waldorf needs a bypass. But I can tell you it's not going to be built because vehicular transportation is not a state priority at all. Anyway, we are traveling southbound on Mattawoman Beantown Road. There is a business Route 5, which forks off of 301 at the center of Waldorf, which will join in about 3 miles. 301 from there continues southwesterly all the way to the Potomac River around Morgantown, and then runs across the 2-mile-long, super high Harry Nice Bridge to connect with the northern neck of Virginia in King George County near Port Royal. And it will eventually go all the way to meet US Route 1 around Ashland, where it will essentially serve as a bypass for US Route 1 and a bailout for I-95, more or less, all the way to Tampa, Florida. Bryantown Road swings back to the southwest to parallel Route 301 as we near the intersection with Business Route 5 to pick up the original route as Leonardtown Road. And we have now reached the intersection. So at this point, if you continued straight, you will leave Route 5 and enter the St. Charles Parkway, which will go through the now very populous St. Charles, where it will eventually become Roswick Road and merge back into Route 301. Well, really intersect back into 301, just north of La Plata, which is the county seat of Charles County. If you turn right at this intersection, it would take you to downtown Waldorf. And if you turn left, which is what we're doing, it continues you on Maryland Route 5 south. Next few minutes we'll be exiting the Waldorf area and in turn the Washington DC exurbs, and we'll have a transition to rural country. This location, we enter an interesting town called Forest Park. We say goodbye to the median. The speed limit drops by about 10 miles an hour, and now we have large lot homes on both sides of the highway. This community is fairly old. All of the trees in it are mature, so it has likely been here for several decades. Southern end of Forest Park. We get our median back and the speed limit returns to 55. Just around this bend, we will go through the Billingsley Road intersection. Billingsley Road serves as the dividing point between St. Charles and White Plains, and on the Route 5 segment marks about where the end of modern suburban sprawl is. right on this bend is Maryland 488, La Plata Road, which is fairly straightforward. You turn right and it takes you to La Plata. Valley is for an enormous creek called Zakaya Swamp. It is about 30 miles long and it begins near Brandywine and it extends all the way south to around Morgantown where it becomes the Wicomico River. And there are two Wicomico rivers. One on the western shore that flows into the Potomac River, another the eastern shore that flows into the bay. And the Wicomico River continues another 10 miles or so all the way to where Cobb Island is. And Zakaya Swamp is pretty much the dividing line between ex-urban and rural. So from here on out, with the exception of small towns, Maryland Route 5 is now exclusively rural. So close, but not quite to the abandoned Herbert subdivision, which used to be a branch of the Oaks Creek Creek subdivision that would feed the Chalk Point generating station. But unlike the Pope's Creek, there was not a second industry available on Burmer, and therefore it was abandoned. Now, coming up on the right is the slip ramp for Maryland Route 5 business, and we're now entering a bypass of Hughesville. This section of bypass is actually so new that I remember actually traveling on what is now the business road as Route 5, and it was badly needed because Hughesville is one of those towns where when there's lots of traffic, it's kind of like, what is the holdup? Where there'd be a 2 or 3 mile backup for no apparent reason. Hughesville itself is actually really small, the downtown area. There's really a handful of roads. Other than that, it's pretty much a crossroads town. Now, from the Maryland Route 4 video, there was Maryland 231, and we are about to reach Maryland 231. 231 serves as the cross counties corridor between Calvert and Charles counties. If you turn left on 231, which is really a roundabout, that will take you onto Prince Frederick Road, which will continue to the Patuxent River, cross the Patuxent River on the Benedict Bridge, enter Calvert County as Halloween Point Road, which will take you all the way up to Route 4 in Prince Frederick. So it is a critical ladder point to switch from the Route 4 corridor, which goes between the Chesapeake Bay and the Patuxent River, and the Route 5 corridor, which goes between the Patuxent River and the Potomac River. And coming on from the right is the original Route 5, now Business Route 5, coming back in south of Hughesville. This section I usually call the plains of the plateau. This is the longest, straightest section of road that I can think of. You can see approximately 3 miles straight to Charlotte Hall if you have sufficient zoom. Entering St. Mary's County through its northernmost point, and Route 5 will take us to its southernmost point. The entire rest of this video will be taking place in St. Mary's County. traveled the entirety of Route 6. That video will be coming after Route 5. It's all recorded. I just have to edit and release it. Route 6, if you turn left or east, will take you on Newmarket Turner Road to the Mechanicsville area, which we will almost but not quite reach today on Route 5. But if you turn right or to the west, it will take you all the way to Lolita and beyond into Nanjemoy. And let me tell you, those areas out there are wild. There's vast expanses of forest and hardly anything else out there. So that will be a very fun thing to watch, so stay posted for when that goes online. South of Charlotte Hall, we arc from pretty much due south to our southeastern trajectory again as we go through the Mechanicsville area. Something that I would say is quite unexpected. So right now, Route 5 is traveling on Three Notch Road, a long, straight, mostly level 4-lane highway. And naturally you would think it would extend all the way out to the end. However, that is not the case. To continue on Maryland Route 5 South, you south of Mechanicsville, come to a 2-lane highway, which will follow the entire rest of the way to Point Lookout. And the 4-lane highway will become Maryland Route 235, which we will eventually meet back with at nearly the end of our journey. And here it is, the junction with Route 235. We're continuing on Route 5 south towards Morganza. Section, it's not uncommon to see Amish horses and buggies. There's been a lot moving south out of Pennsylvania because they don't like that they've pretty much been labeled a tourist attraction in that area. Town of Morganza, and will intersect with Maryland Route 238, which goes down towards the southwest corner between the Wycomico River and the Potomac River, the town of Maddox. This curve is the intersection with Maryland 242, Colton Point Road, which runs down towards Clements and Able, the peninsula between the Potomac River and St. Clements Bay. Hardly anybody goes down that way. Southerly towards Loveville. Everybody hates the DMV, and in Maryland, because the DMV refers to DC, Maryland, and Virginia, we call the DMV the MBA, and everyone hates it too. But if there's one place you want to go to, it's the Loveville MBA. I've gone there, I think, 2 or 3 times, and in every case, I took the ticket, sat down, and got called right away. That's the Loveville MBA right there on our right. And I have nothing but good things to say about it. Mary's County, Route 5 opens up again to a 4-lane divided highway as we pass through the town. There's not much to the town. Most of the population is based in the much larger California and Lexington Park, which are on over east towards the Patuxent River and Solomons, and were briefly featured in the Route 4 video. But the traffic volumes on Route 5 will increase now as we start to pick up demand for the road. And this will largely persist until Maryland 4, and at which point the traffic tends to take 4 northeastward towards California. Welcome to Leonardtown. Intersection with Route 5 and Route 245 Hollywood Road pretty much marks the center of Leonardtown. You can turn left on Maryland 245 and go to Hollywood. This part of Maryland has a real theme with California names. There's California, Hollywood, Oroville, Wildwood, and more. So close to Breton Bay, an inlet of the Potomac River, that I could actually smell it when I was recording this video. If you are getting deja vu right now, you are absolutely right. For we are now approaching the southern terminus of Maryland Route 4, and this is where the end of my Maryland Route 4 video terminated. Now on the Maryland Route 5 video, instead of terminating, we will drive an additional 27 miles. For those who haven't watched the Maryland Route 4 video yet, I highly recommend it. You'll get to see downtown Washington, D.C., Suitland, Forestville, Upper Marlboro, Dunkirk, Huntingtown, Prince Frederick, Port Republic, St. Leonard, Long Beach, White Sands, Lusby, Solomons, not Solomon's Island, that's in the Route 2 video, California, and it can be used to take you to parts of Annapolis, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. Of the remaining 27 miles, approximately 11 of them will be traveling virtually eastward before we take the final turn south. And now to our left is the St. Mary's County Fairgrounds. At this point, we have a fully overcast sky, and the extreme need to keep the camera from overheating was no longer present, and I could finally turn off the massive refrigerator. Fun fact, there is actually a village in this area called Wilderness. And if you look at a satellite image, there's not much else there besides trees. This is largely an empty region that we're passing through right now. Callaway now, and then Great Mills, which are part of the extended region of the California, Lexington Park, Solomon's Island micropolis. Now crossing the St. Mary's River, which is the southernmost large branch of the Potomac, and if you don't turn left here at Great Mills, you are committed to diving further south, which is exactly what we're going to be doing now. So from here on out, we should start to see the traffic whittling down as the peninsula, which is currently measuring 10 miles wide, all of southern Maryland, will begin to close as we near Point Lookout. It's not every day that you see a mobile traffic light, but in this case, that's exactly what we have here. This is a one-way construction zone that is long-term, so instead of flagmen, they're using a mobile traffic light. It is at this point that we're going to make our 90-degree right turn to go from due east to due south. Had we stayed with Maryland Route 235, it would be in the process of downgrading from a 4-lane highway to a 2-lane highway, not unlike the one that we're on right now. So at this point, on the western shore in southern Maryland, we are now below the latitude where you will encounter any 4-lane highways. At long last, we reached tidal water again. To our right is the St. Mary's River. It flows for an additional 6 miles before emptying into the Potomac at Piney Point. This is St. Mary's City, the last town of a significant size that we will encounter. St. Mary's City actually started off as a colonial town in 1634, actually as Maryland's first settlement by Europeans, as well as its original state capital, predating Annapolis. It was essentially established as a religious freedom site for Catholics. There is a lot of historical museums, historic ships, and living history exhibits. So I highly recommend, if you have time to get down this far, or you're in this area to begin with, definitely see it. And that was all of St. Mary's City. Everything south of here are villages, and you can count the number of them on 2 hands. general, you can measure traffic on a rural road in one of two ways. One, if there's any cars ahead or behind you, and two, once that number is zero, the number of cars that pass you on the left side. I was surprised at the amount of traffic this far south, up until St. Inigoes, which we are now reaching. It was at this location that I could tell that we were running out of land. After St. Inigoes, we now enter another empty region, largely just forested, until we reach Ridge. Ridge is significant because it defines an inconsistency between the western shore, which is normally characterized by high plateaus, 100 or so feet above elevation, sometimes as high as 200 feet, hills that go up and down, such as the one that we're on right now, as well as steep slopes and deeply incised stream valleys. Everything east and south of Ridge does not exhibit this geological feature. Instead, it's actually extremely flat, less than 10 feet elevation, and it actually resembles that of the eastern shore. And that might be because we're approaching the Chesapeake Bay itself, as well as becoming extremely far east. In fact, we're about as far east as Tillman Island, or Taylor's Island on the eastern shore. As soon as we get south of Ridge, you will notice that there will be no more ups and downs. At that point, the road will proceed more or less completely flat. Entering the town of Ridge. And I did promise that we were going to reconnect with Maryland Route 235. So that 4-lane highway that we had moved off of about 40 miles earlier ends right here as a 2-lane striped yellow highway, leaving only one, Maryland Route 5, south of this location in southern Maryland. All of southern Maryland is 4 miles wide at this point, and we have 7 to go until we reach Point Lookout. And south of Ridge, only 1 village. This is Scotland, the southernmost population center in southern Maryland. Maryland was a border state in the Civil War. Therefore, it's not surprising that at the southernmost location of southern Maryland, we find the Confederate War Memorial. At this location, we're moving east again. We must turn south one more time into Point Lookout State Park. If you go straight, it takes you into the neighborhood of Scotland Beach. All of southern Maryland is now 2 miles wide. We're now receiving speed limit drops for the entrance to Point Lookout State Park. The entrance is gated, and at this point we must exit the highway to pay admission to enter the park, which I will do. Today it was $3 to enter the park. Not bad considering all the beaches, fishing opportunities, historical sites, and vistas that are in this park. We've turned east and are now looking directly at the Chesapeake Bay, which is incredibly wide here. It is 15 miles or 25 kilometers to Smith Island and 25 miles or 40 kilometers to reach the eastern shore. Here is the Chesapeake Bay. At this location so wide I could not see the other shore. And to our right is Lake Conoy. And on the other side, those trees that are diagonally to the right are about 2/3 of a mile away. That is the shore of the Potomac River. looking at the southern tip of southern Maryland. To the left or east are the waters of the Chesapeake. To the right, west, are the waters of the Potomac River. The two meet right here at Point Lookout. What you see in front of us is the southernmost road and the southernmost tip of land on the western shore of Maryland. The land ends just beyond the lighthouse. And at this location, Route 5 enters a turnaround to itself, effectively the end of the highway, the end of the road for that matter. To finish, I will park my car back to the northwest, the direction from which we came from Washington, D.C., and overlook the Potomac. Thank you all for joining me and watching this video. Stay tuned for Route 6.
This is Point Lookout, which means I am now the southernmost person in southern Maryland because it ends right there.